welcome to the University of Law podcast. My name is Aruna Verma, and I am the Campus Dean and Associate Professor at the London Moorgate Campus. Today, we are joined by Zia Ullah. Zia is a financial crime partner and global head of the firm's corporate crime and investigations group at Eversheds Sutherland. Welcome, Zia. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Aruna. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So we're going to cover some really interesting parts to your journey and how you became the financial crime partner. But before we start, if you can just tell us a bit about your background, please.
Yeah, sure. So I was, I'm a former alumni of the University of Law, but in its predecessor form, the College of Law at Store Street. I did the CPE, as it was known then. So I did a degree in chemistry at University College, and I then went to the College of Law, Store Street, to do the CPE, the Common Professional Examination, the 1-year conversion course, and then I did my LPC at Store Street as well. And then after that, I did my training contract at a small firm in Tottenham called Porters, which no longer exists. So that's basically what happened as I left the College of Law.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for joining us today. So just to start off with then, I know this is a difficult question, but tell us about your typical day, if there is such a thing.
So I suspect a lot of people say, what's a typical day? But I guess where I am now as a relatively senior partner within the business, it's very different to where I was at the start of my career, or even where I was at the start of my career at Eversheds Sutherland, because it didn't actually exist when I joined 9 years ago. It was just Eversheds, but I can tell you more about that later. Day to day, effectively my working day is comprised of supervising any number of pieces of work on behalf of our clients, and that involves obviously me interacting with my team both locally and internationally in some cases on a day-to-day basis, depending on which projects we're working on and what kind of advice it is. My particular area of focus these days is international sanctions. I've focused on that as a specific category of financial crime now for about 15 years. And so because of that, I handle a lot of the sanctions queries that come into the practice, and my team, which is effectively about 22 people in the UK, about 7 of that team will focus on sanctions day to day. So I supervise that work, and then in and around that supervision, I'm involved in management meetings during the day. So that can be firm related, it could be practice related, it could be our own team, our corporate crime team related.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, definitely truly global then. So how do you deal with your time working across so many jurisdictions?
It's day to day, it's actually okay, because I mean, you know, the majority of the work that my team does is centered around our time zone, as it were. So even if the clients involved are in different time zones, or the teams involved in different time zones, day to day doesn't add that much challenge, depending on, you know, as I say, the project involved and where the client is. Sometimes, for example, you know, last week, dealing with a United States-based client, so they're 5 hours behind, and you know they need to schedule calls. We'll pick a time that suits anyone in the team, and I think the greatest area of challenge is when you've got mandates that involve both, you know, the West Coast in the context of the United States, and then the East when it involves Hong Kong. That can be challenging to sort of pick a time that's suitable for everyone else. But day to day, it's not too challenging.
Okay, so we have a range of audiences joining us today. So if you can tell us any tips that you may have for someone who's entering the profession.
I mean, I guess it depends on what your perspective is, and what you want out of your career as a lawyer or elsewhere. Having studied at the university. I mean, effectively, my journey started, as I said, as a trainee in a small two-partner firm in Tottenham, a legal aid practice, and because of where I trained, I focused on legal aid law, and I became what's called a duty solicitor, working in the police stations and magistrates courts for the first 7 years of my career, and then left to sort of focus on serious fraud. And that sort of journey then took me to Barclays for a couple of years, and then back into private practice. And I guess it depends. The world has changed in the context of what's available to people today, as it was available to me back in, when I was starting out in sort of 97, 98, and nearly qualifying in 99. So over 24 years, the legal market's changed massively. The options open to students has opened up massively. So I guess it just depends, Aruna, on what people are looking for from their career. I don't think there's any, the use of the phrase, the traditional career, I think has probably been blown out of the water now. And I don't think there is any kind of traditional career now. So it very much depends on what people want from their journey in law as to, what and how I would advise them to sort of go about it.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to flip that now. So we understand that you are a very successful partner. Talk us through your journey on ending up at Eversheds Sutherland, please.
Yeah, so I started back in 1990. So taking you all the way back, after University of Law, I got a training contract at a legal aid practice in Tottenham. I did 2 years there. On qualification, I moved to another legal aid focused practice in Walthamstow and did 5 years there as a duty solicitor, working in the courts and police stations around North London, North East London, and East London. I did that, as I say, in total, including my training, sort of 7 years. And I felt that after that, I needed to sort of focus my career a little bit more on the elements that I was finding more interesting, which were sort of fraud cases. So I went to work for a firm called Pennoni in Manchester. So I moved from London back up to Manchester in 2005 to do that, and spent in 2 stints. I spent 6.5, 7 years at Pennoni. In between, I went to work for Barclays as global head of sanctions for 2 years, working in group compliance.
Okay.
And then 9 years ago, I joined Eversheds Sutherland.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So some of our listeners will be wanting to hear about your general caseload. So bearing in mind confidentiality, is there anything you can talk about? Any interesting cases? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess what I'd say from the start is that my caseload as such today is very, very different to the caseload that I had going back at the start of my career. So the caseload I had at the start of my career was very much made up of individuals and representing individuals who were in trouble for a variety of different reasons. And back then, I handled call them bog standard, no case was standard, but bog standard sort of robberies, burglaries, thefts, that kind of case, through to serious cases like murder at the end of my sort of general crime career. When I went to work at Pennoni doing serious fraud cases, I acted in a reported case of Ali and Hussein, which is one of the significant money laundering conspiracy cases of the sort of mid 2000s, which was part of the whole change in the law of conspiracy to launder the proceeds of crime, cases that happened in that period of time. So that was a significant case. And then since being at Eversheds, I worked on behalf of the public case, behalf of Barclays, on the case called Himcho versus Barclays. And that was the one and only case that deals with the potential ownership of sanctioned assets by individuals linked or related to designated persons under our sanctions regime. So, they're still significant court cases, but day to day now, I don't do a lot of litigation as such. Day to day, my caseload is made up of acting for many of the well-known corporate firms across the globe, predominantly in the financial services sector. So it's the big clearer banks, a lot of regulated financial institutions in the main make up the majority of our clients.
Okay, so you talked about general high street crime that you used to practice in previously. So I guess those cases were not very lengthy, but could you average out how long a case would take on what you're working on now?
I guess it depended on what was happening in the particular case itself. So they weren't lengthy if people were tending to plead guilty very quickly. So if they were in court and decided to plead guilty of a day, that was it. It was done and dusted. Those that went on to plead not guilty, it depended on the seriousness of the case as to how long that matter would take. So I mentioned that I handled a murder case. I mean that case went on. I mean I actually left it with the firm when I left, but it'd been going on for 18 months at the point I left it. So it very much depends on where you are. A case that I've just been dealing with, the only real big criminal case that I've dealt with whilst at Eversheds has, again, I left. We unfortunately didn't. I no longer act for the client, but that case had lasted and still going on 6 years from the point at which he was interviewed by Revenue and Customs to the point at which he was charged by Revenue and Customs, and that case is still not finished. So it very much depends on which regulator, which enforcement agency you're talking about as to how long cases take.
Okay, and just on that point there, so what sort of agencies or stakeholders do you tend to work with then? I know you've mentioned a few.
Yeah, so I mean, in the main, for the work that I do today, it's mainly the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, the Office for Financial Sanctions Implementation, OFSI, because of the work that we do in the financial crime space and also the sanctions space. Dotted around that, we also work with international regulators like the US Department for Treasury's Office for Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, that's the US sanctions regulator. And then we also work with European regulators as well on the sanctions side. On the non-sanctions side, it's a matter of public record that Eversheds Sutherland acts for the SFO. So we deal with the SFO, the NCA. I chair a number of committees for UK Finance, which is effectively the industry association for the British banking sector. So, we have a lot of inroads into different industry associations and different regulators.
As with most lawyers, they have a favourite piece of legislation. What is yours and why?
I guess the one bit of legislation that has effectively been constant through my career is effectively the Proceeds of Crime Act of 2002. That actually came into fruition in 2003, but for the past 20 years and even today, been dealing with a matter that that as POCA, as it's known, POCA, we had to give some POCA advice, and that has been the constant piece of legislation from the beginning of my criminal practice through to where I am today as a financial crime specialist. And so that would be the one piece of legislation I'd say has been at the beginning and end, not at the end, but the beginning and currency of my legal journey.
Okay, so you've had a career that has spanned from high street, crimes to all the way up to corruption, and you seem to be running a very busy practice. How do you keep up to date with the law?
Yeah, it's one of the constant challenges. I think working at a firm like Eversheds Sutherland, the sort of the bigger firms, you have the relative luxury of having practice support lawyers who work in different areas of the business, so they can provide us with legal updates as and when they come. But I think, like with anyone else today, I subscribe to all the regulatory agencies when they're doing updates effectively, so I get direct emails from them whenever something comes through. And also because we're involved, as I say, with a lot of industry associations, we know we're involved actually in a lot of the consultations that are undertaken whenever significant legislative changes are about to happen. So things like the economic crime plan, that then the Law Commission's review of corporate criminal liability, which are now leading to the corporate offence of failing to prevent fraud. We're aware of those consultations. We input into them, so we know when they're happening. So for significant bits of legislation, it's not too challenging. What I think is still remains a challenge is to make sure that you are aware and cognizant of cases that might be relevant to the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. And just my final question then. Um, what opportunities and challenges are you faced with, and how have you overcome and used them?
I mean, the opportunities are, I mean, I think from a practice perspective are significant just because my area of focus in financial crime and in particular sanctions is very, very topical. The Russia-Ukraine crisis has meant that sanctions in particular has come to the top of the risk agenda for many corporates out there. So in that sense, me sort of focusing on that sort of 15 or so years ago has borne out to be a good decision. But I didn't actually take the job at Barclays knowing that sanctions would be this would happen sort of 15 years later. I basically took a decision earlier on in my career that I thought that it would be important to vary what I did. So not just be doing one thing all the way through. And I think that for your students is actually critically important, that the sort of the multifaceted aspect of the legal services industry today is a great way of demonstrating the fact that you can choose to do many different things over the course of your career and still, direct where you want to be as a lawyer, if that's where you want to be. I moved, as I said, I worked at Barclays in the compliance function. I wasn't technically a lawyer whilst I was there, but it hasn't really held me back as in the context of my private practice career. And I'd say actually it's boosted my career in the context of how I've then subsequently decided to determine where I wanted to be as a lawyer going forward.
So, Zia, finally, let's talk about some challenges in your career then. So, have there been any challenges that you've faced? Please go through how you have overcome these.
Yeah, thanks, Aruna. I think the one thing that I'd probably draw out for University of Law students is that I was at UCL, as I mentioned, and I studied chemistry, and I actually failed a year of my degree course, and then only went on to get a 2-2, and I think degree classification. And I think in the context of a career in law, I was told then, and I think even I know today that students coming through to our firm now, there are minimum requirements, and it can sometimes seem like it's a significant barrier to you achieving what you want to achieve in your legal career. And all I'd say is that it doesn't need to be. I obviously realised when those things happened to me that it blocked off a path to applying to certain firms at that point in my career. But I always had the confidence in my own ability further on to know that at some point, if I wanted to go down that path, I could. And I just say I'd reiterate that to your students and to any students out there, which is that just because you face a knockback at some point in your career won't stop you from achieving what you want to achieve in law.
I think that's a really good point to end on. Thank you so much, Zia. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing with such transparency. We really appreciate your time. Um, Please do keep in touch and watch out for the next podcast. Thank you.